Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly program from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. It's Virtual Voices of the Game. Very glad that you could join us. I know that we have a number of returning folks, but also some first-time watchers and listeners. We want to welcome you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the Hall of Fame's Education Department. Over the last few weeks and months, we have had a number of terrific guests for Virtual Voices of the Game. We have talked to writers, broadcasters, players, even film critics. But today we're going to do something that is a little bit different. This man is our guest today. He first started in baseball back in 1980 when the California Angels hired him out of Cal Poly in Pomona to work in their public relations department. He became the director of media relations for the team in 1985 and eventually became the Angels' vice president of communications. But then about a year ago, June of 2019, he left the Angels after that long tenure to become the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We want to welcome to the program Tim Mead. Tim, thank you very much for being with us. It has certainly been an eventful first year for you, between a large crowd for the 2019 induction, the elections over the winter of Derek Jeter, Larry Walker, Ted Simmons, and Marvin Miller, and then something that none of us could have foreseen last year, and that, of course, has been this nationwide and worldwide pandemic. Let's talk about what are the things that you've been trying to do. We've only recently come back to the museum. We were shut down for over 100 days. What are you, Tim, as president, what have you been trying to do to try to, keep the Hall of Fame viable and really not so much viable, but in people's memory banks, keep people thinking of the Hall of Fame? What have your efforts been over these past 110 days or so?
Bruce, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to participate today. I would say that very bluntly, and I know you don't like to take a lot of credit, but you and Stephanie Hazard, John Shostakofsky, and others are the ones, in my mind, very responsible for keeping us, in the minds of folks externally with programs such as this. The Instagram live chat that John's put together with Boog Shambi and Chipper Jones, and up in our education program. Through all our social media platforms. It's been wonderful to see, and it's been very, very important. I think baseball has been missed, without stating the obvious. And every time a baseball game is played, I would cease to be amazed if we weren't mentioned somewhere between a dozen to 25 times. The word Hall of Fame or Hall of Famers is not mentioned. So we kind of missed that. And that's, that transpired, Bruce, even during spring training. So I think ultimately for the last 3 months, it's staying in touch internally. I'm very, very proud, if I have the right to be proud and respectful of what this staff has done in continuing to fulfill its responsibilities, its obligations, its foresight into the future of the institution. And ultimately, we are going to have learned some valuable lessons of what the public wants. These Zoom sessions are very, 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 very important, and how we continue even when we settle back into our new normal times. As far as coming here, for me, it's really been a new education. It's been an opportunity to learn. You bring some ideas from the club level, but this is different than the club level. And I think, working with John, senior staff, and others throughout the hall, ultimately, one of my goals, or our goals, is really to tie even more so the present, product and the players of today a little bit with the history, and have a clear understanding. Because I think when baseball players today talk about those that they respect, I think it helps the education program and the history of the game itself. If you have Mike Trout talking about Al Kaline or Mickey Mantle, I think that registers in a different way that I don't think there's anything that we could do that would ultimately be greater than helping tie that bond and or that bridge. And I think there's a lot of different things that we're searching for, and we'll key in on in the future in that regard.
Tim, normally the president of the Hall of Fame would be spending a lot of his time traveling, going to ballparks, going to spring training, going to a variety of meetings in different ports of call. But for you, it's basically been Cooperstown and your other home in Southern California these last 3 to 3.5 months.
It has, Bruce, and I was able to spend some time back home. It's the most time I've had at home in 41 years. And that was, my wife certainly reminded me of that before I left. So it was enjoyable. Your heart's there. And a big part of my heart is here. My mind was here and what the future was, and it was going to be and how we planned. And again, everybody, all the Hall of Fame members, or the staff members did an incredible job to get to the point where we are today. But I've stayed in touch with a lot of people, and there's a lot of relationships. I think I came in with a friendship relationship with about 21 of the current Hall of Famers before I took the job. Some of those new relationships were initiated last June and July. Some have grown. Some need to continue to be nurtured and grown, moving forward. And certainly in-person meetings and conversations are always more productive than a phone call or a text message. But Zoom and FaceTime and the different aspects or tools that we have to connect are helpful. And I think that one of the very big positives of this whole scenario, and there are silver linings when all is said and done, we've all learned to communicate a little bit more. I think because our lives have slowed down a little bit, there have been conversations amongst people, whether it's members of the media, Hall of Famer, current player, manager, that probably would have been difficult to have secured prior to all this. So I think maybe one of the good things is we've learned a little bit more how important that interpersonal communication is, how much we thrive on it a little bit. And I believe it's helped me with a few of the relationships moving forward with the Hall of Famers.
Let's begin with your birth, Athens, Greece. This is something that a lot of people might not be aware of. It's not Athens, New York. This is the real Athens, Athens, Greece. I was initially going to ask you if you were part of a military family or if your family was originally from Greece. But as you were telling me a few moments ago off air, neither of those stories applies here.
Well, if you look at the nose, Bruce, it's very apparent that I'm most likely European, some degree. So, no, I was adopted in Athens, Greece, when I was 6 months old, in an orphanage in Athens from a couple that I consider my parents. I've never said my adoptive parents. They've always been my mom and dad. But my dad was in the military, and at the time, as he tells me, that they had an attorney friend, and it was just a little bit easier. The bureaucracy to adopt abroad was just a little bit easier than it was in the States. So, they went over there at a time. I happened to be, I guess at the lunch hour. There was just the connection, the smile, whatever. It was the right time, fate, whatever. And, they adopted me. They went through the process. My mom came back and picked me up after the paperwork was completed. We flew to outside of London for another couple years and then came to the States. So, my dad's was in the Army, served in Korea, later joined the Air Force, and the military, I believe to a certain degree helped give me the chance and, in an indirect way.
What part of the United States did you initially settle into?
Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, outside of Fort Myers. And we were there until 5th grade, moved to Arlington, Virginia. And my dad was stationed at the Pentagon. So we lived in Virginia, moved to California in '69. So right outside of San Bernardino in a place called Highland, a place that I consider really my hometown, obviously Athens, Greece, but San Bernardino, Highland is where I grew up and, lived in California from '69 through present. You've heard me say this many times, but I reside I live in Southern California, but I reside and work in Cooperstown, New York.
So growing up in California, did you have one or two baseball heroes in particular?
My first hero, Bruce, was Frank Howard. First baseball game I ever went to, to see this giant of a man, walk on a field. And the first time I saw the great big backyard, this green backyard that was so immaculately kept, to watch a baseball game and see Frank Howard walk by. And I think we were with our Little League team at the time and were able to go down by the stands by the dugout, and here's Frank Howard walk by. I had the privilege and the great honor of meeting him years later when he was a hitting coach with the Yankees. I actually met him on my 8th birthday trying to get an autograph. But he was one person through all the players and all the people I've met in this game, because he was the first person you gravitated to, that will always hold a special place in my heart. And I think one of the exciting things for me is all the people that have described Frank Howard and their relationships with him and who he was, as not just as a player, but as a man. I hooked onto the right person.
Tim, you must have been heartbroken when he was traded to Washington.
Well, yeah, I didn't, at that time, I really didn't understand trades and all those, all those things. Coming to Washington, I was glad because I could watch him play. And, for a while before we went out west. And I just, that original Washington uniform I just so enjoyed it with the Senators. And it's kind of interesting, Bruce, just bringing up Frank Howard with you. Last year when John and I covered the World Series and eventually went into the clubhouse, after game 7 to gain some artifacts, interestingly for me, my life has just been Angels. And in my mind, it always will be, even though you represent 30 teams now. But going in that clubhouse, I was hit with a bit of nostalgia that this was my first team, in terms of just Washington and watching that success, knowing the history with Walter Johnson and obviously Howard and McMullen and Cullen and all those guys. To watch Washington celebrate a championship was kind of cool outside of my role.
I have to admit, the first time I went up to interview Frank Howard, I was a little bit intimidated just because of his sheer size. About 6'8", 260 pounds probably at that point. He was a coach when I first met him. But then you start talking to him, any fears you have because of his intimidating size, they go away very quickly. Very much so. And you just described the size, Bruce, but he truly was a gentle giant who could hit the ball a long, long way. Loved the game of baseball, and in his role as a coach was a tremendous teacher of the game. People just gravitated to Hank Howard. You hear some of the stories, now some of these guys are coaches, but when Frank was with San Diego and then New York and other places, he has a tremendous ability of communicating across the spectrum. And that's really very, very difficult in a major league clubhouse. More than ever before. I don't know that managers, for the most part, are really ever lose their jobs for strategy. Sometimes it's communication, and that's the point person. But those coaches become key. And Frank was blessed with a great skill set to communicate with everybody. Certainly, when you look at that size, if you didn't listen, you're going to have another problem. Absolutely. Let's move ahead. 1980, you start working for the California Angels. We're going to talk about your relationship with this man, Gene Autry, in a moment. But you're just out of college. You go to interview for an internship. How did that go? Who ended up hiring you? Well, I went in and did the internship interview after being rejected 3 times. With letters that I had written. And there was only one intern in the organization at the moment, or at that time. And about 2 weeks after my 3rd rejection letter, I was a little persistent. I got a call to come in, and basically by that time, I'd already kind of sold them on my interest and love of the game. Yeah, maybe it was a little bit over the top in the letter writing, but I was given brownie points for persistency. And
I connected with a gentleman named Tom Seberg and Bob Karginian, and we had a great conversation. They weren't looking for a super fan. They were looking for someone who had a work ethic, kind of told me the do's and don'ts of what's required to going in a clubhouse dealing with athletes and celebrities, because it can be very intimidating if you've never been around it. And, you harken back to your first interview with a professional athlete, probably a lot less comfortable than you are today. I mean, that's just the nature of things. So I had that internship, and we were 1980, there were probably 38 front office members at that time. So you got to know everybody very quickly. But I was given some good advice by a gentleman named Preston Gomez, and it was look, listen, and observe. So contrary to how I may sound on this call, I didn't say a lot during that internship year. I listened, I looked, and I observed. And I think I gained more respect by keeping my mouth closed than anything that I've ever done. And Bruce, I was blessed with the organization at that time for the gentleman you're looking at on the screen, but also there was Red Patterson and Buzzy Bavasi, George Goodale, who was one of Mr. Autry's sidekicks, if you will. Older people with experience who had no problem teaching younger people, sharing their experience and insights if you were willing to listen. And I was willing to listen, and I benefited, 41 years later, I'm the product of that education.
Tim, how long after you started with the Angels did you have your first chance to meet Mr. Autry?
The summer of 1980, when I worked there. Mr. Autry always came through the offices, and the way you see him dressed there, Bruce, that's the way Gene Autry dressed every day. August and September's, sometimes July's can be particularly hot in Southern California. That is the way Mr. Autry handled himself all the time. And that wasn't a staged photo. That was Mr. Autry in the dugout, and he would say, "Come here and sit down, young man," or "What's going on in your world today?" He would walk by our offices. So when I first saw Mr. Autry, I believe I was standing at a Xerox machine. And he walked in and said, "Hi, I'm Gene Autry, and you are." And, we had a conversation, but he never made you feel uncomfortable in terms of, stand at attention. He had a presence that commanded respect in a way that you just felt like this is a special human being. I mean, at one time he was as big as the Beatles in this country, and I don't think a lot of people really realize that, but Mr. Autry was just a kind-hearted soul who loved baseball. And if you go into his suite today, Bruce, in Anaheim, it has not changed since he passed away, but the pictures on his wall are of presidents and of ball players. I think there's only a couple from his Hollywood days.
Tim, we have a great photo from the Hall of Fame's collection. Gene Autry is in it. He's leading a band of Angels. This had to be sometime in the mid-1960s. They're all on bicycles somewhere in Southern California. That's Leon Wagner on the left on the bike. He's got the Angels cap. Wasn't really able to figure out any of the other players. It's just a great photograph. I guess this photo sums up the kind of character and the kind of energy that he had.
No doubt. I believe that's Albie Pearson in the background as well. This is in Palm Springs. Okay. This is going from the hotel to the ballpark in Palm Springs. Mr. Autry had the Autry Hotel, which is there, and then the ballpark was probably about 2 miles away. So that was a PR photo opportunity that the great PR folks that preceded me set up. And again, as I alluded to earlier, look at how Mr. Autry is dressed on a bike. And notice where some of the guys, I think if you see him wearing casual shoes or light shoes, those are boots. And Mr. Autry is riding that bike on. Wow. And so, yeah, that's Palm Springs. And that was my home for many years before we finally went to Arizona for spring training in '93. But some of the great memories are those 2 weeks that we would spend, with Mr. Autry. Every year, Bruce, he would host a dinner for the players at his house. players and their families. And I think, I really think we may have been the last group to hear him sing in one of those dinners. And he performed, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and sang for the kids. But he loved kids and he loved his ball players.
I love the photo on so many levels. You see the palm trees in the background. You also see the old style angel caps with a halo on the top. That is evident. You've got an older gentleman on the left holding a baseball bat for some reason, and Gene Autry just casually leading the way. Did you ever have to do a bike ride like this?
Was never asked to do the bike ride. But I'm not sure. That almost looks like Bill Rigney. It's just tough to tell because Riggs was obviously the original manager.
Yeah.
But that looks very, very much like Bill Rigney.
It could be. That's a good guess. We'll have to do a little more research in that, but you may be right. As you settle in with the Angels, early 1980s, one of their established veterans was this guy, a guy that I've long admired in baseball. He once played for the team that I followed when I was young, the New York Yankees. But prior to that, he was an MVP with the Angels. He was known as one of the real leaders of the team and really one of the leaders throughout baseball, Don Baylor. And I understand you and him became very, very close.
Yeah, in fact, Groove is the greatest leader that I was around, in the 748 players that I went through with the Angels. July of 1979, I kind of finagled my way into getting a press pass from the Angels. I was doing a story on Baseball Chapel at the time, and John Warhas played for the Angels and the Dodgers and became the chapel leader, set it up because I wanted to do a story for the school or the university newspaper. And he introduced me to Don, just on an interview to talk to him. And then Don said, hey, next Saturday, come back. We'll spend some more time. And I'll give you more in depth. Well, I come back that next Saturday. It's July of 1979 during Donnie's MVP season. It's the night that he hit the game-tying home run in the bottom of the ninth and the walk-off against the Yankees in the 11th. It's the series that Ryan had the one-hitter, the controversial one-hitter, and the Angels swept the Yankees. I'm at the end of the dugout. I'm a know-nothing kid with black glasses, intimidated as can be. Don comes off the field, and a future Spink winner says, hey, Don, can we go do that interview right now? And he goes, no, I got this kid here first. Takes me into the clubhouse, and I spent probably the next 35 minutes talking to Don Baylor about Baseball Chapel, baseball. He helped set my career up and will be forever grateful. One of the biggest losses to me personally, he just would have turned 73 a couple weeks ago. I can't emphasize, when you hear that phrase, Bruce, a man's man, that was a man's man. And there was a reason that Donnie's last 3 years, he went to 3 World Series teams. And though he wasn't the everyday player, he was in demand for his presence. The 82 Angels, which is still the greatest assemblage of talent that I was ever around. From Reggie to Carew to Doug DeCinces, Freddie Lynn, that's who they looked up to, was Don Baylor. And it's not because he was always vocal and, ranting and raving and stuff. He had a presence, and when he spoke articulately, he spoke with conviction. And I don't say leadership is in fear. I say leadership is in respect. And, Donnie came back before he passed away, coached with the Angels. And, those were a couple of the great years to have spent with him before he passed.
You mentioned a couple of other great players, now members of the Hall of Fame, Reggie Jackson, Rod Carew, and that's you in the middle. Do you remember what year this photo was taken?
This was 95, because that's probably one of the best logos that we ever had in club history. Actually, I think it was about 30 pounds ago, Bruce, so it would have been about 95.
Yeah.
But those were two guys in 82 to have watched Reggie's first year, to have watched Reggie and Rod. I felt like I was handling PR in between two titans, because that's what they were. And, I look back and they are both dear friends now. Rod actually broke me in my first day as an intern. I was sent down by the public relations office to get some autographs in a box. They always have these, individual head and shoulder shots. So I was asked to go down there and just tell Rod Carew he needs to sign those. Well, I go down there and, powder blue shirt, polyester tie and everything. And I said, Mr. Carew, my name's Tim Mead. I'm the new Angels intern. And I just had this really excited look. And he was standing kind of in his locker looking at something. And he spun on his heels and aired me out about, take those away, get those away. I don't care who you are. Don't you ever come around here again, blah, blah, blah. And went on and on. My powder blue shirt became navy very, very quickly. Here's one of these guys that I looked up to as my idols. I started to walk away and he laughed because I'd been set up. I'd been set up from he and the PR department. So that was my intern hazing, if you will. He's still a dear friend. We talk regularly. He's a special man. We went through his daughter's passing together. I was actually at the hospital with Bill Bavasi the night Michelle passed away. And I saw him, transform from the player to the person that made a commitment to his daughter that the rest of his life he would devote attention to the cause. And then obviously everything he's gone through with the heart attack and the heart transplant. He's a special human being. Yeah, absolutely right there. And that young lady on Rod's right, Rhonda, very much responsible for, I think, helping save his life. Reggie Jackson, on the other hand, somebody that taught me a different passion for the game. I've said this 1,000 times, Bruce, and I will always feel this way. Reggie Jackson never, ever cheated the game of baseball. Up 10-1, down 10-1. He ran to first base hard each and every play. People had a different want or expectation for Reggie because of the persona. But when he came from the Yankees and we signed him as a free agent, that that date, when you think about the little media, national media there was the biggest press conference I'd ever attended. And Reggie was a presence, and I think people know that his intelligence quota is just absolutely quotient is phenomenal. He can talk about almost anything and talk about it, with great command and knowledge. And I have a wonderful respect for Reggie Jackson.
And let's go back to Rod Carew for a moment. For those who have never been to Cooperstown, they may be wondering about the background. This is actually behind the Otesaga Hotel, which is the place where all the Hall of Famers would stay throughout Hall of Fame weekend. And that's beautiful Lake Otsego, which is the lake that James Fenimore Cooper, the writer, made famous, wrote about it in a couple of his Leatherstocking Tales. And I believe this photo would have been after his heart problems, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. It looks, yeah, I think that probably would have been about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But he did, what Rod went through, he was actually out golfing by himself when he had the heart attack. And he was very, very fortunate that he had it very close to the clubhouse, that they were able to get him. But, I went and visited him in the hospital, and it was really kind of a, tough situation for me, because you look up to your heroes and athletes, you just see them differently than we do each other. We know, going to the hospital at times is going to be part of it, but to see Rodney kind of hooked up and having to battle through all that was very, very difficult, from, having first watched your hero, then getting to know your hero. But his strength and his desire to move forward was phenomenal. And Rhonda played such a key role in that. And then to get the heart transplant, he got a young man's heart. I think he's making the most of each and every day. Rod's just one of those people with a big heart, truly, not just to capitalize on the transplant, but Rod's somebody that has pulled alongside in Southern California, seen a Little League team practicing, pulled in the parking lot and gotten out and just sat and watched the kids and then talked to them about hitting. He loves it. He absolutely loves the game, but he loves life. I mean, we all know people who've kind of been on that edge and gone through personal challenges. Rod Carew appreciates every second, every minute of every day.
He looks great in the photograph. It's been an amazing comeback. I happen to know somebody personally here in Cooperstown who's gone through a heart transplant. She's much younger than Rod Carew was when he had his, but it's just it's amazing technology. It's an amazing medical advance, but also requires a remarkable work ethic on the part of the person who's undergone the transplant, and obviously Carew's got that.
Very much so, and I think you hit on that, Bruce. And so much what you have to do physically, and adhering to what the doctors, almost force you to do, and then what it does to your body. But it's so much up here, and I will always believe that Rod's commitment as an athlete and that self-discipline served him well. And Rhonda, was in the room a couple times. Rhonda pushed him too, and I think between her push, his self-discipline, and the will of life, it got him through it. Because what he went through, and even though you talk about how much we've progressed medically, it is still a shocking thing to your body and your system, and there's a lot of complications even after the success. So Rod's understood his limitations, but he was still in spring training this year with Tony Oliva in Florida in camp. He still loves to put on the uniform. He has a great deal of respect for the uniform and anybody who puts it on.
Tim, you mentioned earlier that 1982 Angels team, which went to the postseason. So this was your first taste of the postseason. You were not there in 79 working for the team, but you were there in 1982. And I imagine as part of the public relations team, you played a big role in putting together this ALCS program.
Very much, Bruce, it doesn't seem that long ago. And I seem to remember a debate about if we were charging too much at $2. But I look at that photo and remember when that was taken in Palm Springs, and that we took a lot to look and say that those are 4 MVPs and those were 4 presence guys. But that 82, I think, while you look at the photo and see how impressive that is with talent, perhaps the most impressive part of that cover is the middle photo, to look at a 65,000 seat ballpark. And that's what the Angels were at that time. And obviously we played the Milwaukee Brewers, filled that ballpark up for those first 2 nights when we beat the Brewers, before heading back to Milwaukee. Reasonably confident that we were going to go to the next step to the World Series, but that didn't happen. Had a great manager, somebody I will never think history is as fair to as he deserves, and that's Gene Mauch. That club had a tremendous amount of respect for Gene. They really did. It was a perfect compilation of stardom, talent, and leadership. It's just, it didn't work out, but I have that program at home in a very, very special place. And, it was my second full year, 3rd year in baseball, but second full year. And, you kind of think, hey, is this what it's like? So you had 82, then went to 86, and then it was a 16-year journey in the desert after that. So I got spoiled in 82.
I would imagine having to put together something like a postseason program, because you have to do it so quickly after clinching. There's not a lot of time. I would think there's a lot of pressure doing something like that.
There was. And Bruce, and I look back and I think that we had a couple of the outside writers contribute. And certainly if you look at the program there to how programs are put together today, a lot different. But between doing a postseason media guide, a postseason program, getting your notes ready, getting credentials ready, it was difficult. But you have to understand, when you go to postseason, your adrenaline is on a different level. It just is. And that time, obviously, we had to go through the LCS and then the World Series. There was no division series play. We went down, kind of the wire. We had some great series with Kansas City at that time to divisions were structured differently. But you started working on it, and one of the things that Major League Baseball recommends is if you're within roughly 10 games September 1st, you start going through your postseason planning. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have to wait till the night or the day we clinched it. We started doing some preparatory work, because if you do wait to the 11th hour, you just don't get it done. But I do recall, I mean, you're taking me back a little bit, I recall the excitement of being able to work on a postseason program. And, that time I was slightly younger, so sleep really didn't matter quite as much as perhaps it does today.
Tim, let's jump ahead 6 years, 1988. The Angels draft a promising left-hander, Jim Abbott, with their first-round pick. And here from our collection, we have a scouting report. It was a report that was done of Jim Abbott while he was in college. It's probably hard for folks to read, but there's a specific comment that I want to read out loud. It's toward the bottom of what you see on the screen here under the weaknesses category. And the scout writes, despite his manual dexterity, he's not quite quick enough transferring glove to his right hand. So that was something the scouts were concerned about. Jim Abbott, born essentially with the one hand, the left hand. When you first saw this top prospect, young man without a right hand, what were your impressions? What did you think?
Well, when I first saw him, Bruce, was after my office was right across the room where the scouts were holding the draft. And I was very close. I mean, we were a small organization, so I was very close with all those people in operations. Bob Fontaine, the scouting director, Mike Porter, general manager. And there was some debate how this would be perceived. And, this is a first round draft choice. Can we hold out to the second one and, not have to go? There was just debate. But all I heard from John Nieder there and Bob Fontaine, that this is a special young man. And if Mr. AUTRY signed off on it, even though there was, once you come out of the room, everybody's in agreement, but behind closed doors, not everybody's always in agreement. I would tell you, when they came out of that room, they were very much in agreement, because they talked it through, and it was the right thing to do for the Angels. We had a bad year in 1988 on the field, so there were some people that looked at it as a little bit of not a gimmick, normal gimmicks, but just kind of an attention PR grab a little bit. Jimmy had to deal with some of those things and those discussions, but Bob Fontaine was never more certain about somebody in his draft than he felt about Jim Abbott. And he was right. He was absolutely right.
Well, he had several terrific seasons with the Angels, really pitched to the level of a #1 starter. I remember as a Yankee fan how excited I was when the Yankees traded for Jim Abbott, because they needed a top flight pitcher, a young pitcher like this. The fact that he was left-handed was a bonus. And of course, he ends up pitching the no-hitter at Yankee Stadium, one of the highlights of his career. Jim Abbott is a great story of success, overcoming adversity. Here's a story that's not as well known. We've talked about it off air before, but it's something that hits home with me, because DERON Johnson was a guy I remembered as a player. He was part of that Oakland A's dynasty. He was with the team in 1973 when they won the World Series, the middle of their 3 championships. After his playing days, he becomes the Angels hitting coach in 1989. But then 2 years later, 1991, he's told that he has cancer in both of his lungs. He asks the writers not to print anything. He doesn't want the public to know about it, keeps it quiet. He's told by the doctors the best thing, what you should really do, is check in the hospital right now, get your treatment. But he says no. He wanted to keep working, and my understanding is he kept working for the rest of the season. This was a pretty amazing guy.
You're spot on, Bruce. And I would tell you, even looking at the photo of DJ, special human being. Mark Wicker, noted columnist of the Orange County Register, one of the great writers in our sports writers in our country, wrote a great column after DERON passed away, and he said, had some of the greatest baseball stories that he'd ever heard, but rarely used the word I. That's just not who DERON Johnson was. There was a manager, Doug Rader at the time, when Darren was sick, was kind of in a little bit of trouble, you know, whether he's going to lose his job or maintain his job. And Darren and I and Doug were very, very close, as you get to be with the manager and the coaches. And I can remember I knew what the prognosis or the diagnosis on Darren was, but he comes to me and pulls me aside because he'd started to see maybe some lack of communication within the organization, and Doug starting to feel the walls. And he asked me, you know, what I'd heard. He goes, "Hey, T, how's our friend doing? You know, what's happening with our friend?" And, you know, I'm thinking, I'm looking at Darren in the eyes, knowing that, you know, that the time I'm getting told that we may have to be making an announcement pretty soon, he's asking me with everything going on in his life about Doug Rader. And it was one of the hardest conversations I ever had, because I'm feeling every time I'm crossing paths with Darren, I know the time's short, and I know he's exactly where he wanted to be. It was on a ball field. It was a very difficult, emotional time, but he loved to talk hitting. And I'm glad you brought him up in there, because, you know, as time goes on and people pass and time passes, Darren Johnson's one of those baseball players. He's one of those gamer guys that I hope will always continue to enter conversations, because he was a special person that treated myself, my staff, younger players, trainers, writers with a great deal of respect. He was the always there guy.
Is it true that he actually brought an oxygen tank to the ballpark?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he continues for the rest of the season. I know that he wanted to be there for spring training, but his condition by then had deteriorated so much, he was just too weak to do so. And then he died later in 1992. And for me, he was one of the first guys I remember seeing play. And then he retires, and then he's one of the first guys I remember passing away. And it just kind of hit me hard. And then when I learned more about his story, really came to admire him. On a lighter note, there's a legend with Darren Johnson that as a younger man, he once punched a horse. I don't know if that's true. Maybe you can shed some light on that. But that's the story anyway.
I'm not sure of that, but maybe that's where they got the scene with Mongo and Blazing Saddles.
That's right. That's exactly what I thought of. It's in print. Who knows whether it's true, but certainly a great man, great baseball person, Darren Johnson. Let's talk about happier times in Angels history, and I guess this would be the peak in terms of team accomplishments, the 2002 World Championship Trophy. Tell us what's going through your mind. The Angels are 1 out away from winning it all. What are you thinking about?
Well, I tell you, Bruce, at that moment, throughout that postseason, you're just so busy. I mean, you're averaging probably 3.5 hours sleep a night. Everybody needs something from you, so you're busy, and your adrenaline kicks in. But it was with 1 out, you know, runners on first and second. Reggie Sanders is up. We had the SWAT squad. Anaheim SWAT squad was in our dugout. I'm underneath. I have 2 of my assistants. Our first thing, if we win it, because you never said when we win it in baseball, you just don't do it, was to go on the field and grab players for the "We're Going to Disney" commercial. But when Sanders came up, Percy's on the mound. It's the only time I walked in. We have our video room in the batting cage. I walked back in there, and it's the only time in October of 2002 I got a little selfish, and I prayed. I consciously prayed to myself. I said, God, I've been through this in 82 and 86. Please don't let it happen again. And so I didn't see the fly ball until I came up the steps and you started to hear the crowd. Lofton hits it to Erstad. Darren says to himself, and you can see this in any interview, the only thing Darren Erstad heard when he caught that fly ball as it was coming down was his dad saying, "Catch the ball with 2 hands." So Darren catches it, heard his dad, then everything, unfolds, and we rush the field, we do all the things we have to do. But I just know that was a special time with a special group of people in a community that had waited 42 years. By winning that World Series, you were able to deal with the present and the future moving forward. There was no more of that curse, the Angels curse, the Septembers, the postseason letdowns. It was just special. And I think for us, the great thing that I'll remember, Bruce, every one of those series, I would go in the training room afterwards with Percival or others, and we would have a conversation with Chuck Finley or Gary DiSarcina on the phone. Mm-hmm. That group of players really felt as though they won for the past as much as for themselves. And if you go back and just look at the interviews, they talk about the players that came before them. So they weren't caught up in their own emotions of what they did. It was the greatest assemblage of baseball rats that I've been around. They were their happiest when they were playing baseball. And in fact, it was about 3.5 weeks after the World Series, one of our prominent players called and said, "Hey, Tim, no more Tonight shows or Letterman shows and all those things, man. We're going to shut it down and just enjoy this now." It wasn't a group looking for commercialism or notoriety. They had accomplished what they set out to accomplish. And, again, 6-14 to start the season, calls for the manager, for Soch to be fired, or Bill Stoneman to win 99 games. I can't watch that video often enough.
Mm. So that's the pinnacle of team success. Here on an individual basis, this could be the greatest player the Angels have ever had. Seems like there's a pretty good chance he'll spend his entire career with the franchise. Tim, what do you remember about the first time that you met Mike Trout?
A young man who went to the draft. There were, I think, 3 players that night who went to the Major League draft. You knew right then and there his love for baseball. You'd heard about him. You'd heard our scouting department talk about him. Even with the greatest reviews, Bruce, I don't know that anybody imagined it was going to go to the level he has. He's attained. He is a kid. He is a kid who plays the game with the same fervor and love and passion that he did, when he first came up. I just remember him being very, very respectful. Mike was somebody that took teaching from coaches, Torrey Hunter, others. He sought out information. One of the things about Mike is he always wants to get better. That smile you see on his face is a genuine smile, and I think that's why he endears himself with everyone that he comes into contact with. Umpires, opponents, writers, anybody. He's just, I've not met anybody who's had more demands on their time than Mike Trout to try to, and you get into the whole debate about marketing this or that. The great thing about Mike is he markets himself by just being himself. And that's the beauty. And I think that's what we, as baseball fans, which is what you and I are when all is said and done, that's what we want. We want to watch somebody who enjoys what he does, who loves what he does, who brings out the best in other people. And that's what again, I know many folks have heard me say that as great a player as he is, he's a much better person. He just is. And the game is blessed to have him. It just is.
We're going to start taking questions in our chat box for the Hall of Fame president, Tim Mead. So go to the chat box. It says Zoom group chat at the top. Type in your question, and we'll do our best to get in as many questions as we can. Before we do that, though, Tim, let's talk about 2019, about a year ago. It's June. You make a change. You leave sunny Southern California for the unpredictable weather patterns of upstate New York. How did this all come about?
If I can take about 20 seconds, just pause on that photo for a minute, Bruce, and I'll get back to you. It's a change, and I've gone through it a lot of times. This is just a special place. I had the best job that anybody could want. I had the best job in baseball as far as I was concerned. I really did. And, talking to Jeff Idelson, having a meeting with Jane Clark, doing a little bit of research here, knowing about you and others, you know, the great Jim Gates, and, you know, you're just a special group of people. I had the privilege, and I took it very seriously, to be the caretaker, if you will, of Angels history. It means everything to me. But to come be part of a group that are the caretakers of the history of the game we love, it's just a special opportunity. Now, making that change weather-wise, I had not invested in a parka, and last parka I ever had was the parka that my parents bought me when I was a kid, so in Virginia. So I have 3 parkas now, and you know, with COVID, I didn't get to use stage 3 yet during the extreme winter, but I have the feeling I won't be able to escape that forthcoming in 2020. But I don't look back. I think our lives are chapters, and every chapter needs to be the best at that moment. And this is the best of the moment. I miss the day in and day out grind, excitement, challenges of baseball. But this is something for me to look back. I get to have a clear understanding a little bit about the history of the game that I love, that you don't necessarily always get on the club level. And it's kind of a not a reward to myself. It's a privilege. I look at it, and, you know, with the blessing of my family to be able to do this with them still back in California, it's a privilege to kind of come to where baseball is at its best each and every day. And people like you, and I'm not just saying this because you're hosting this, but people like you that take that responsibility with a great deal of dedication and passion has made this transition much easier for me.
Tim, we have a question from one of our fans, Ryan Witcher. He wants to know about favorite memory about the 2002 season. We did talk about the World Series, but outside of the series that year, any particular moment or event from that 2002 season that really sticks with you?
I'll tell you, Joe Madden, we clinched in Texas, and I didn't go on that road trip. The staff celebrated. Once the game was over, we went inside of one of our dining areas and popped champagne, and they had some, you know, desserts brought in, and because it had been 16 years. So I met the buses when they got back from Texas. Joe got off the bus, and he walked up to me and gave me the lineup card from the clinching game that put us back in postseason. And, you know, Soch signed it, and I have it framed and everything at home. But he goes, this is one that I know. He goes, I know why you weren't there. This is what you did. This is for you. And that will always mean a great deal for everything that they were going through at the moment and the excitement, that he had it on the plane, had it on the bus, and knew I was going to be there to give it to me. So that was it. And then I think really, Bruce, I referred to it earlier, to see the genuine excitement of the fans. I mean, it's not just winning. It's every, you know, when the Red Sox won or the Cubs won finally. It's not just that year. It's the history. It's the people that had gone through the journey and the process to get to that winning, who had been dejected, disappointed, angry, hurt, whatever. To see all that culminate in happiness and excitement. You know, championships are great for the guys to get to wear the rings, all of us who get rings. But at the end of the day, it's what it does for a community and the lasting effect on that community. Because we all like to walk around and say, you know, how many times you say, we won? Well, you know, if you're in any community that won, you kind of have bragging rights until that next champion is crowned, and you get to refer back to it for the rest of your life. So, you know, championships are, I don't know, enjoyed far beyond the reaches of an organization.
Well, here at the Hall of Fame, we don't have championships, but we do have an annual induction ceremony. Of course, had to cancel this year's event, so the class of 2020 will be honored as part of 2021. Last year, you were working, but sort of not working. You were observing Jeff Idelson, the outgoing president. you got really your first opportunity to actively at least watch and maybe semi-participate in an induction ceremony. Was it what you thought it would be?
It was, Bruce. It was successful because I didn't drop a plaque, and I had 6 opportunities, so I considered it a success. No, it was, Jeff and John did a great job of prepping me for things. I was in awe being up there, but I did take a moment during that induction ceremony to realize how many of those men on the stage were responsible for my love affair with the game of baseball. From the time I was a young man and thinking about watching the Big Red Machine with Johnny Bench and knowing that Hank Aaron was to my left, I realized that this is baseball nirvana. And then to look at the fans out there, and see that crowd, it was almost to a certain degree that World Series moment. Everybody was celebrating something. We don't get to be, we have our family parties and gatherings, but to get a diverse group of people and that kind of numbers coming to celebrate, the accomplishments and careers of individuals. Yet when you look at Mariano, you look at Mike Mussina and Lee Smith and Harold Baines and the others, ultimately the great part, it's their moment to shine, but it's their moment on a platform to say thank you to all the people responsible for their career and their success. So I look at it kind of broad instead of just, we just got to be part of a big celebration of one of the greatest fraternities on planet Earth.
During the winter, or actually before the winter, you've got duties at the World Series last year. I mean, you've been to the World Series before, so from that standpoint, this was not a new experience, but it was new in that it was your first World Series representing the Baseball Hall of Fame. Tell us about the great moment here with Howie Kendrick.
Well, 40 years, I never walked into a visiting clubhouse after a World Series, that's for sure, or another clubhouse other than, the Angels. So that was kind of weird, not having a horse in the race, if you will. But I watched Howie grow up with the Angels from the time he was a prospect in the minor leagues. We called Howie after his grand slam, in the LCS. And, I sent him a text that night and congratulated him on the grand slam and all. And I said, hey, if you're interested in sending some Cooperstown way, we'd love to have an artifact from the game. Texted me back literally about an hour and 20 minutes later in the midst of his celebration. He goes, yeah, you want the bat? And he goes, thanks for everything. Yeah, you want the bat. So we agreed to hook up during the World Series and went in and got the bat in Washington. And then after Game 7, walked up, we gave each other a hug in the clubhouse. And I said, when I was hugging him, I said, I'm going to ask you for something again. And he goes, yeah, you want the ball? So he reaches into a bag and he pulls out the ball with the yellow from hitting the foul pole. And John and I were fortunate to come back from Washington, I believe, with 9 items, including that ball that was the decider in the 2019 World Series. But that picture right there, Bruce, is of 2 friends. It has very little to do with my role in the Hall of Fame and, a player who succeeded. Those are just 2 friends that care a great deal about each other. And, we text probably every 10 days to 2 weeks. And, he has a special family. Howie has a great story behind him. And I can't have a rooting interest in these things, but I was very, very happy and proud of him for what transpired last year.
Tim, we have just a couple of minutes left, but want to talk about recent events here in Cooperstown and, of course, nationwide. Folks occasionally will ask me why the Hall of Fame decided to open at the particular time they did. Our reopening, if you will, was on June the 26th, a couple of weeks ago. Why at that time? How did that decision come about?
Well, ultimately, Bruce, it was the first day that we were allowed by the state and health officials to open up phase 4. So I think that there was a lot of preparation by everyone within this organization to be ready, our health and safety measures put in place. And, we wanted to make sure that the employees, as you well know, were comfortable first, but that was the first day that we could do so. And we wanted to be ready as much as we could be ready. And I think one of the keys to success of this outstanding staff is its flexibility to make adjustments if we need to. And quite honestly, we haven't had to make too many adjustments since we opened the door on the 26th. And you know, right now it's a max of 25% max capacity is allowed by the state. We certainly hope that grows so more folks can enjoy the Hall of Fame, you know, before school returns and whatever form and vacations are over. But this institution has been missed by a lot of people. I know we've all heard from folks during the time that the doors were closed, but I think the Hall did an outstanding job in your areas of reaching out externally and keeping our brand out there, keeping what was going on. I think we've opened up some ideas that we will keep incorporated moving forward in, you know, in the future. And we've learned from this experience as well. We all missed the Hall's role in terms of access, but the Hall has been there throughout this process as well.
Final question, Tim. People also want to know about what's next for the Hall of Fame, and I guess specifically, they want to know about the ceremony, the combined ceremony in 2021. I know it's still early, it's more than a year away, but what can you tell us about the plans in that direction?
Well, we will have that's a great question, Bruce. We will have the combined classes of 2020, 2021, depending on what transpires, you know, from the BBWA vote in January and, you know, whatever the Veterans Committee, however that proceeds moving forward as well. So, you know, we're going to anticipate a tremendous crowd. Obviously, we would have this month. We're very hopeful, I think, first and foremost, that, you know, where we're at with COVID, we have a better understanding, a better way of negating its effects, its reach, because before anything happens, Bruce, we're going to have to make sure that we have the safety and health concerns of our Hall of Famers, of our staff, of the citizenry of the village of Cooperstown, and all our guests. And you know, that factored in certainly before to our postponing this year's celebration. So we look forward kind of celebrating the two classes, but a celebration of the induction ceremony. It's like you know, we're missing an old friend who didn't show up this year. And I think it's another one of those, as I described earlier with the picture with Mariano, it's a celebration. And I think by that time, hopefully we've had many other opportunities prior, but we all need those big moments. We all need those big moments that we can celebrate as a collective group of people, you know, something that's so special that we hold dear to our hearts. There's, you know, the controversies and the discussions. Now let's just take all those things off to the side and come together and celebrate people. And whether it's an even larger class than the 4 right now, time will tell, but it is certainly the 4 gentlemen and their accomplishments that will be celebrated are going to be very, very special. And we just look forward to it. I mean, it certainly gives us enough time to plan, Bruce.
Yeah, it'll all be combined in one weekend. It won't be 2 separate weekends. And
Right.
The ceremony itself, probably a little longer than normal, but it'll all take place on the Sunday afternoon at the Sports Center.
Right. And you know, Bruce, we've had obviously 6 2 of the last 3 years. We're at 4 now. We'll make those adjustments, but there's a lot that goes on for the folks watching for a Hall of Fame induction. There's so many moving parts and things. For us, the decision from the board on April 30th was it really made no sense to try to have a moving target date of adjustment for this year. We weren't going to do something virtually. We weren't going to have a made for TV event. This is something that the village and the people need to celebrate together. And, you know, we think it's combining classes next year. It's just the right way to go.
Tim, we want to thank you for spending a little more than an hour with us. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for your memories of your great days with the Angels and your early days with the Baseball Hall of Fame. Thank you, Tim.
Bruce, thank you very much.
The president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, Tim Mead, he's been our guest for Voices of the Game. A reminder that our next virtual program will be coming up in just a couple of days on Thursday afternoon. We'll be doing a special presentation called The Presidents and the Pastime, a look at the connection between baseball and the White House. So that's coming up on Thursday. Thanks for being with us here in Cooperstown. Have a great day, everybody.